Sysdig is the first cloud-native visibility and security platform that eliminates the need for standalone tools like container security and monitoring. Using Sysdig's unique data approach, enterprises can solve a variety of visibility and security issues at massive enterprise scale for multi- and hybrid cloud environments. Sysdig will enable your organization to scan and block vulnerable images and enforce best practices pre-production, block threats, enforce compliance, and monitor application performance, proactively alert on incidents, reduce MTTR with forensics, and capture detailed audit records, all from a single unified platform. Accelerate your transition to containers and then have confidence in your ongoing operations using Sysdig. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/Sysdig. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Modern software development and deployment paradigms require security testing solutions that are automated, accurate, and integrate into your DevOps workflow. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools, including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker, to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Visit securityweekly.com/Synopsys to learn more.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by Matt Alderman and John Kinsella. Mark your calendars for our Security Weekly Holiday Extravaganza. On December 19th, Security Weekly will be live streaming 5 one-hour panel discussions with some of the most knowledgeable professionals in the industry. To round out the evening, Ed Skudis will be joining the Security Weekly host to give his annual announcement about the CounterHack Holiday Hack Challenge. You can view the live stream on our YouTube channel or by visiting securityweekly.com/live. We hope to see you there. Attending RSA Conference 2020, February 24th through 28th, come attend that. And you can join thousands of security professionals, forward-thinking innovators, and solution providers for 5 days of actionable learning, inspiring conversation, and breakthrough ideas. Register before January 24th and save $900 on a full conference pass. Save an extra $150 with the code, and it's a bit long, so you'll have to come back to our show notes page to check it out, but the code is 5OUSWKLYFD. Hope to see you there. Well, Matt and John, we have some interesting news. Mostly, we've got quite a lot of bugs to talk about this week. Starting off with Google has upped the amount of the bounty that they're willing to pay out for Android in the Android ecosystem. So they're up to $1 million. Although technically, if you can find something in one of their basically preview versions, they'll add on an extra 50%. So you could get up to $1.5 million for basically a bypass that gets out of the sandbox, that breaks their Titan M chip and doesn't require end user interaction. So a little bit of hand waving there on the details, but hey, it's only $1.5 million.
Well, the beautiful part is Android, so all the Unix hackers are going to get out there and figure out how to hack this thing and go try to make $1.5 million, right?
It is interesting. I think that there's some interesting things, though, to kind of pick apart here, because even in Google's their blog post about this, they've never paid out that $1 million or $1.5 million. In 2019, they say they paid out about $1.5 million for that entire year. To roughly 100 researchers, which also then they talk about that breaks down into like an average of $15,000 per payout. But I think in this space, especially in Android or iOS bounties, but even to generally speaking about the larger bug bounty ecosystem, talking about averages is a little bit misleading, and we should really be focusing on either the median or even like quartiles about where these payments are. Because if you break down some of the math too, they've been paying out over the last 4 years just a little over $2,000 per report they get in. And in 2019, they said that average went up to about $3,800. So you'll still make some money, but these $1 million, and upwards bounties, I think are a little bit misleading, because they're essentially saying we're competing with these small boutique exploit developers who are selling these exploits either possibly on the black market, of course, or the dark market, or whatever the term of art is these days, or simply to other exploit vendors who are taking these from an offensive security perspective.
Yeah, an average of
what pops-
$3,800 is far away from the old $200,000, let alone the $1 million plus payouts.
Yeah. What pops
Yes.
in my head when I was reading about this morning, I'm wondering, it'd be interesting to see if there's a study out there showing, excuse me, as these dollar amounts are, projected dollar amounts go up for the Apples and the Googles, is that sort of acting like a magnet and pulling some of the research away from other projects? And then, well, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was going to say on that. So Katie Masuras, she is integral to the entire bug bounty ecosystem. They exist because of Katie's work, and she's also been pointing out some of the perverse incentives that can come out of this, like you were mentioning, John. Is both pulling away research from other areas, as well as it a little bit minimizes the amount of effort going into hardening these devices, as well as potentially even saying, why should I work for the Google or the Apple or the Microsoft, for that matter, on a salary, when I can just get a nice big payout from them and do everything on my own. So I just wanted to jump in there and highlight that area of this, as well as I totally interrupted for some other points you were probably going to make there.
No, I'm going to bookmark that comment about hardening Android and come back to about 3 or 4 stories, right? But if we talk about that one. But no, what I was going to say is I had seen this morning, I don't want to switch screens here, but there was something in a bunch of unfound or sort of unrecognized bugs in not the x64, but the x32 entry code in Linux. So I don't know. I mean, the timing was probably just fortuitous between those two that I saw, but yeah, I'll have to go back and look and see what Katie's been writing about.
Yeah, and we're going to keep the audience suspense and talk about that aspect of possibly hardening in Android. So let's hold that thought for a moment. So stay listening, listeners. But there's another thing about talking about breaches. So if we're talking about the mega bounty of $1 million, there's the Giga Breach. That was in the news this week, that is essentially a aggregation, it looks like, of many breaches, in addition to the breach of a data aggregator themselves. So, and this was billions into, I think it was 1.2 billion records that was discovered by this researcher, Vinny Troia, who was basically scouring the dark web. Since that's the fancy term, it should be called dark cyber or cyber darkness or something like that. But it was just interesting that it's not yet necessarily even one company that was breached in this case. It's more of an example that not only are let's just call them the bad actors aggregating data from all these breaches, but there are actually companies out there that are aggregating data from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, other social media, X, Y, Z, and so on, and to create consumer profiles. And so there was an interesting Wired article that was also covering this. And the comment was, why not just go and, if you want to go after certain types of this data, just go and actually pay for it, because to pay for this type of data at 1,000 users at a time could possibly be even cheaper and in practice even legal, rather than going after and trying to scour for a lot of these scraped profiles and so on.
What I thought was interesting about this story, because I know Vinny, and I've interviewed him for jobs at Tenable back in the day, and some of the work that he's been doing. What I find interesting about this story, right, is here somebody is collecting a lot of account data. They put them on a server up in Google Cloud Services, and then they misconfigure it to leave it exposed for somebody else to find the data. I just find this really ironic that here you have hackers assembling data, and yet it is exposed for others to go get it.
Absolutely, and it just points out that well, I shouldn't. Everybody, security is hard, and it's easy to misconfigure. As well as there's probably another we could do. We could probably go another half hour on different reasons and what ways you might throw that up there for others to discover and access and misuse, especially if that data no longer is of use to you for whatever initial reasons you had for whatever campaign you were running. But we'll turn from there and start to talk about a little bit more of Android. So here's another bug that was, I think, if I have my timeline correct, it was the Android was notified about hijacking the camera on Android devices several months ago, and then it's now we've gotten back in July, I believe, in August they were fixed, and now we're in November in the timeline of disclosure when Checkmarx researchers are talking about it. And this is I wanted to emphasize less on the fact that here is a way that Android devices and could be abused yet again to take advantage of a camera in this case, but more talk about the fact that Google says Pixel is fixed, but I believe that Samsung or some of the other devices in the Android ecosystem actually aren't quite fixed yet. So this speaks to that broader challenge, if we're putting our application security hats on, of how do we make sure fixes get sent out to the entire ecosystem. And that kind of ties into a little bit when we were talking with Tim about the IoT space, that it's great to have a fix, but it's not so great for your end users when either that fix isn't even available to them or is very much delayed, and they are getting the fix, a month, weeks or a month after other participants within the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, the timeline here is pretty interesting, right? Because this gets disclosed on July 4th. Doesn't get acknowledged until August, basically August 1st, that it's acknowledged and confirmed by Google. August 29th for Samsung, so almost another month after that. And now the publication is just coming out in November for people to be aware of this. I mean, there's a pretty long timeline here of activities that are happening where these phones are vulnerable and susceptible to these attacks.
Yeah, and Google's been trying to, at the broader picture, there are some other things that Google has announced. One of the things they're announcing, trying to bring their Android back to the mainline Linux kernel. So there was another article that was explaining that every time Google builds Android, they're doing something like a few thousand additions here and a few thousand deletions here to the kernel that they're building. So they're essentially a somewhat, maybe I'll even say very different kernel from what the mainstream Linux is. And that just introduces a lot of complexity, and that does make it harder for their other users of the AOSP to maintain patches. And I believe, too, they were talking about this even last year, calling it Project Treble, is what they were trying to do so that they could say, yes, we know that all software needs to be patched. It's not picking on Android for having security vulnerabilities. It's more picking on Android for having so many vulnerabilities that have to be patched and distributed to so many different platforms that are built on top of the AOSP.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the challenges with the Android ecosystem is because of the way Android, the ecosystem is, you have lots of different hardware variations with lots of different Android version variations. It makes it very difficult to quickly respond to vulnerabilities and get them patched across that entire ecosystem. This is the advantage Apple has with a very consolidated ecosystem of their iOS and their hardware. Makes it really easy for them to roll it out. You can talk about all the pros and cons about the differences between Android and iOS all day long, but that is one advantage Apple has over Android in this particular case, is because of patching all these variants is tough.
Yeah, Matt did a very nice job of saying what I was going to say in a snarky way. It's I don't know. There's a few things,
John.
Well, sometimes you put a nicer coat of sugar over it than I do. But there's a few things with this. So first I have to at least commentary on it really quickly. So yeah, I not to be a smug Apple user, but I'd rather have the device which gets the updates a little better. If you think about that the Android system in general, people are so used to just clicking on yes, giving away permissions. And they're talking about not so much the camera part itself, but the ability to actually go and start reading the file system because everything's exposed. It's just, I don't find it an impressive security solution the way the Android system is done. And then the next one is going to throw in on there, oh yeah, Project Zero. What happened to 90-day disclosures? So we're looking now 3+ months out, and we're still, a little bit of their own dog food.
It's over 4 months in this particular case. I mean, from July 4th all the way to today. I mean, it's November 25th, right? I mean, we're over 4 months. We're not in that 90-day window anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm quite fine if you can get. And I'll bring 2 points together. If you can get a stripped down version of Android, like on a Pixel or like the OnePlus, something like that, that's really clean and light and tight, cool, more power to you. It's when you start looking at these other guys like the Samsungs that have the bloatware on there, and then they're either feet dragging or they don't have enough resources to take that new kernel or what have it, that, sometimes we're not, I mean, it's better now than a few years ago, but sometimes you wouldn't see these devices getting updated versions of Android for 6-12 months. I get that for some people that's fine. We're back to Tim's mom. Tim's mom probably has an Android device. No, I'm kidding. But for some people that's fine. But it's something to think about. When we go back to again talking about procurement, personal procurement. When we go to buy those type of things, is that something we're satisfied with?
Yeah, and it ties into the personal as well as enterprise when you start to talk about the move, the whole, what is it, Beyond Corp, Zero Trust, et cetera, that when you want to do device attestation, having a very slowed down or a lagging update cycle means that you can't necessarily be taking as good advantage of device attestation and of security features that may be available on the latest Android combined with the latest Pixel hardware. And you now have this, not even a long tail, but maybe like a big fat fluffy tail of devices that can't take advantage of all the security features on the modern Android devices, as well as the ways that a lot of these permissions are changing. And I think that I also wanted just to echo, John, to what you were saying, that this idea of intents and the all or nothing permissions, or permissions that don't decay over time, meaning they're granted at install time but never checked in on again, even if the app updates. There's a lot of anti-patterns we've seen within the Google, the Play store, with the types of applications just saying, give me all of these permissions, please, right now, because I may need them in the future and I don't want to bug the user again. And so those are the types of things it's important to start to change, both on the consumer as well as enterprise angles. Continuing on, this is somewhat of a Google-centric bug section this week, but this one is more about a interesting cross-site scripting, and this was interesting for two reasons. Because normally I find cross-site scripting be a snooze fest. One was about AMP, which is accelerated mobile pages, that Google has been working on for, I want to say, at least 3-4 years, if not a little bit longer. That's essentially trying to make HTML or the web application, the presentation layer for mobile devices, more efficient. But in this case, they're also talking about bringing basically dynamic email into, which means JavaScript, and executing JavaScript within email, or dynamic content within email. And no one is asking for this, I would say. So here is a little bit of snarkiness coming out, except perhaps for advertisers, because advertisers love having more dynamic email to demonstrate, to play for users. But in this case, there was a cross-site scripting that was taking advantage of a technique called DOM clobbering, which is essentially a really fun way of basically using the HTML DOM against itself rather than pulling out DOM elements and saying, typically those elements would say, yes, I am an element, and you can't get into the raw text of that element in order to pop up an alert box, for example. But what this link does, or the article that I linked to, is a really great write-up of walking through how to get into the DOM, pull out the DOM properties and then actually index into a element of a HTML collection so that you can have your raw alert pop-up be executed as JavaScript. So really, I just wanted to highlight it as an example of a great write-up, a great learning technique, and something that I'd highly encourage everyone to go read through and just get a new appreciation for some interesting nuances about cross-site scripting.
Two quick things. One, we have enough troubles with emails by itself, let alone introducing JavaScript into the mix and doing this dynamically. All the phishing vendors will have a heyday. But number two, we also all know all the problems with JavaScript. So, what we've done is just taken something that's already insecure and just added a whole new layer to it to make it even worse than we could ever have expected.
Well, 2020 is coming up, so JavaScript can only get worse, Matt. So, and with that said, let's talk about Well, let's talk about things that are getting better. So I did want to call out one real quickly. There's an article from Amazon talking about their EC2 Instant Metadata Service v2. And I think this is actually a follow-on or a consequence or an improvement when we talked about the Capital One breach a couple weeks ago. We were talking about, there was some congressional oversight being threatened on how should cloud security providers be better. We can't legislate security, but we can elevate some basics. And what this is doing is one of the important things, the way they're protecting their metadata from service from SSRF, is basically throwing a tokenized header. And so that is much more difficult to spoof, if not impossible, from many types of basic SSRF attacks. And so this way, Amazon has done actually what GCP is at for a while and said, we're going to say that SSRFs, we're not going to fix it for you, but we're going to say that it's actually going to be a lot less impactful to the metadata service on our instances that you are running. So we're going to make it a little bit harder to shoot yourself in the foot. And I kind of ran out of a really good metaphor there, but that's the best I got.
Yeah, but what I like about this is Amazon's trying to prevent stupidity in this particular case, right? Is allowing open web app firewalls, allowing open reverse proxies, protecting against SSRF. What they're trying to do is put some basic safeguards in place to go, look, I'm going to try to prevent you from doing something really silly and stupid, like configure this incorrectly. And it is going to be shipped as the default, which is great. I just hope people don't go back and use the old version so that they can go around this capability. But I think this is really good to kind of raise the bar, at least from a base configuration, and not allowing people to create some of these silly mistakes that lead to these breaches.
Yeah, and I do want to be kind to our DevOps audience and say some of it may be stupidity, sure, but some of it's also just surprising consequences of, oh wait, an SSRF can do that, and having that better conversation with the DevOps and DevSecOps teams about threat modeling and not only reducing that idea of IAM for your least privileges, but also all of the systems that are interconnected. So hopefully people will go to V2 and not just fall back to V1, how it's been, before, just because it's easier. Because I think what you highlight right there is that if it's easier, that's the way it's going to be done, but that's not going to be the secure way. So hopefully this doesn't.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I mean, if Amazon's going to take the heat for the breach when it's a misconfiguration, then this is an appropriate response, in my opinion, for AWS. Say, look, I'm going to prevent you from doing this kind of stuff in the future, so I don't take the heat for something you guys misconfigured.
Yeah, that's that shared responsibility model that AWS is trying to drive home, and I even mentioned it at the. That's also one of the things I was alluding to when we were talking with Tim. When you do a lot of vendor security, oftentimes you may run into the scenario where the vendor says, here's the SOC 2 Type 2 report from Amazon, so therefore we're secure. And just having to have that polite conversation about how that security isn't transitive and those follow-up questions about what their web application may look like.
Yeah, and I just threw this article in here on the WAF, just in case you want to know what a WAF is supposed to do and isn't supposed to do, and you want a little better. It kind of correlates to the previous story. I don't think we have to get into details necessarily, but I thought it was a good follow-up to that announcement to say, what is it that I use a WAF for, and when shouldn't I use a WAF? And so anyways, I thought that was a good learning tool there.
Yeah, I thought that was a good learning because it does call out some really good things. Jeremiah talks quite a bit about it. He has a really good history about being both talking against how before how he was a bit skeptical of WAFs and then coming around to be a proponent of them. But it is a really good article about how to think about WAFs and approach it. So yeah, I agree. Go read it for some basics, but that also is a nice lead in to talk about, for example, Cloudflare, which does have a WAF, but also introduced a new tool, and I'm going to cross my fingers and pronounce it correctly, the Flan scan, which is basically a lightweight network vulnerability scanner, which is just another way of saying they took Nmap, a vulnerability scanning script, an NSC script for Nmap, some Python, and strangely some LaTeX, so they must have way too many academics running around there to like that technology, but basically saying we want to do asset inventory and we need to do some compliance scanning. We need to do it fast and accurate, and we don't see a tool solving that for us, either open source or commercial. So they went in, and rather than starting from first principles and building up a whole new scanner from the very beginning, instrumented Nmap in a way that works for them and now have shared it. So I just think that's a really positive thing to add to the security community in terms of here's a company solving a problem for themselves, but probably a problem that's not unique to their environment, and then sharing that so others can benefit.
Now, someone on this session today might disagree with there's not a commercial capability out there.
Well, we're not talking about web application scanners, so I'm not sure what.
No, but I mean, Qualys has their asset discovery capability and some of the other things that are out there, right? So I'm just saying, I think there are some tools out there that can do this as well.
I was surprised. Yes. I mean, even leaving the commercial aspects out of it, the Qualys and our brethren, there's a good number of open source tools out there. I don't know. The last time I personally used Nmap, and I love Nmap, don't get me wrong, but the last time I used Nmap for doing fingerprinting of services seemed like it was still not 100%. So would I want to use that as a basis for my vulnerability scanner? That's the part I'm sort of, I'd want to sit down and really kick the tires on that a lot.
Which is why most of the commercial vulnerability scanners created their own fingerprinting engine because of some of those limitations within Nmap. Not that Nmap can't be used. I think, if I recall, I think there is an Nmap component still in the Qualys configuration that can be used. But I mean, everybody's had to add additional fingerprinting capabilities above and beyond what base Nmap did to make sure you could fingerprint the device correctly, make sure you're putting the right payloads against the server. So like I said, I'm pretty sure there's commercial and like you said, there's definitely a few other open source solutions out there.
Because to talk about that for 1 second more, and again, leave Qualys out of it. But that's where a commercial product really excels compared to an open source product is. There's people being paid to sit and write those signatures or write those ability to how do you detect what that version is and is it vulnerable or not. Some of us do it better than others. But that's really sort of, I mean, the example I used to use back in the day was when, like Myth TV and people used to have like open source PVRs at home. You weren't able to get a usable open source TV guide. You'd have to go and actually get that from a commercial source because somebody was actually going and collating that data. And it's sort of the same thing. So, interesting.
That might be an interesting augment to their capabilities. But again, there's definitely well-established commercial capabilities out there. Might be a good augment to an endpoint solution or something like that, maybe.
And it's not like the folks at Cloudflare are by any chance, not top notch. So they must have something that's working for them. So probably worth taking a look.
Yeah, I think there's a difference too between which problem are they trying to optimize for? Was it quality of scanning or was it distributing scanning? Because we've also seen, at a bigger picture, we see a lot of tools coming out of Google or coming out of Facebook. But typically those tools are solving problems that the scale of Google, the scale of Facebook have, and nobody else has. So, you can probably count on on one hand, maybe two, the number of companies that need to benefit from, managing petabytes of data or scanning, 15 class A's worth of IP addresses. Or handling, 100,000 to 500,000 to just under 1 million types of assets, and doing that for asset inventory. So when they're solving those problems, typically those aren't the problems everybody else has.
True,
So, yeah,
but even in some of those
good
examples,
points.
I definitely see where the commercial vendors have actually added some additional capabilities, because you've seen some interesting open source tools come out, but there is still some commercialization for deployment and management and other things that still need to be wrapped around some of these open source tools, even though they're coming out of Facebook and Google and others. They're not always as efficient as you would think. Great capabilities, don't get me wrong, but then somebody comes in commercially, puts some additional functionality and value around it for deployment, operational use, etc. Then you get a really interesting balance, I think.
I think so. I think I wanted to end on one last article, and we won't have too much time to talk about it, so we'll maybe throw it out there as a topic of discussion for the listeners amongst their colleagues and DevOps teams over the next week. But it does tie into the IoT discussion we had with Tim as well. And the article is "When You Know Too Much: Protecting Security Data from Security People," and it's talking about the insider threat, and we heard that from Twitter was most in the news recently, for as well as some other companies. Yahoo was in the news last couple of weeks, and the idea of even IoT devices as they're collecting and aggregating data. What data are they collecting? As well as we talked about this massive data breach, this aggregated data breach. As security teams are also within enterprises collecting data, there are other aspects of employee privacy that are equally interesting and equally important, as well as their own user privacy. And so we probably don't, at least I don't know that we can get into a meaningful discussion on it right now, but I wanted to throw that out there as something perhaps we'll dive into the future. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of this segment. So I want to thank you, Matt. I want to thank you, John, for joining us. I want to thank everyone for listening. And we will see you next week on Application Security Weekly.